Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our discussion of My Neighbor Totoro tonight. We are thrilled that you're here to join us for the celebration of Asian American Heritage Month. This is our second year of ReggieCon here at Illinois State University, and I have to tell you that it just keeps getting more fun and more entertaining. And we're actually in our seventh ReggieCon panel of the 21-22 year. And sadly, this is our last for the academic year. But my name is Jana Albrecht, and I am the Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management here at Illinois State University. But before we begin the panel tonight, I have just a few details to keep everything running smoothly so everyone in the audience understands where we're going and where we're coming from. So first, this session is being recorded. It will be archived on the ReggieCon website. If you're needing confirmation of attendance, we'll send a link in the chat so there'll be a form that you can fill out later on in the presentation. Third, the presenters' video and audio are on, but we cannot hear or see any of the guests. So I tell you that because they do love your questions. So we will monitor the Q&A function. And so please, start firing away those questions as soon as you have them. It may take us a little bit to get to those questions, but they do want to communicate with you this evening. So keep those coming. Last but not least, on the ReggieCon website, you can find recordings of the previous panels, and you can also find information about all of the 2021-22 previous panels, and you can keep an eye out for anything that's coming for 22 and 23. And if you haven't seen any of them, I highly encourage you to go out and view, because there's some good stuff in there. Okay, so I think that's all of my housekeeping. So at this time, I am pleased to introduce our fearless leader, who also happens to be our moderator and panelist for tonight's discussion. His name is Dr. Scott Jordan. He's also a professor in the chair of psychology here at Illinois State. So Scott, please take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Albrecht, and we appreciate all the help you provide for ReggieCon. And welcome to everyone to ReggieCon, the con that asks the question, what's your story? So as she said, I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scott, a cognitive psychologist, philosopher here at Illinois State University. And tonight we come together to celebrate Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month with a discussion of Hayao Miyazaki's masterpiece, My Neighbor Totoro. Just before we begin, however, I have to give a shout out to all of those people who actually help us look like we know what we're doing. Dr. Amelia Noah Elkins, Dr. Jana Albrecht, Mr. Sean Thornton, who does all the amazing artwork you see for ReggieCon flyers, Dr. Danny Schroeder, and Miss Summer Simmons. Again, without you guys, we wouldn't be able to be here doing what we're doing. So now I want to introduce tonight's panel. We'll begin with that motley crew of comic and pop culture aficionados, purveyors of all things geekdom, the ReggieCon crew. First, the hardest working man in comics, Mr. Victor Dandridge Jr. Victor, please come on in and tell the audience a little something about who you are, as well as your favorite Totoro memory.
Oh man, hello everybody. Self-publishing comic book creator from Columbus, Ohio, Victor Dandridge. It's an honor to be back here, part of the Reggie crew one more time, to talk about this monumental film, which I just recently watched for the very first time. So obviously the thing that got me was being able to sit with my daughters, who have similar ages to the girls in the movie, and watch something that is meant to appeal to the child in me that I was somewhat inaccessible to talk to, because the dad in me overruled it being there with my girls. So that was a beautiful thing to kind of recognize, like, hey, I'm in that space now. I'm the dad.
You're the dad. That's fantastic. The dad is my favorite character, I'll have to admit. All right, next, please come on in. The one, the only Dr. Teresa Rojas. Please tell the audience a little something about who you are and your favorite memory of My Neighbor Totoro.
I am Dr. Teresa Rojas, aka Doc Tiro. I am a professor of English at Modesto Junior College here in the beautiful Central Valley. And I'm also the first professor of ethnic studies at Modesto Junior College. And I am the director of the Latinx Comic Arts Festival. Favorite memory. So I saw this for the first time last year when we were watching another Miyazaki film, and it was my first time, and I was scared the whole time. I didn't know, I didn't read anything about it. I didn't want to know anything about it. I just wanted to watch it blind for the first time, and And I didn't know. I was like, whimsy. Oh, wait, don't get too caught up because you don't know what's going to happen. They're spirits. Things are haunted. And it was just so lovely to have that very fresh experience, and then just really enjoy the whole thing. And then I rewatched it recently, and I was like, still feel that suspense actually.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. And next we have my colleague and partner in crime in all things nerdy, the one, the only Dr. Eric Wesselman. Eric, please come on in and tell the audience something about who you are and your favorite Totoro memory.
Thank you. So I'm Dr. Eric Wesselman, a social psychologist and professor in the Department of Psychology at Illinois State University. My primary research interest is on the dynamics of belonging and its opposite experience, social exclusion. I also love to connect psychological research topics to popular media narratives, especially movies and superhero comics. My favorite memory of Totoro is very similar to Victor's. I got it from my two older daughters when they were 6 and 4. And of course, they immediately adopted the dynamic of Sasuke and Mei. We hadn't watched it in a few years, but when I put it in earlier today to refresh my memory, they, who are now 9 and 7, immediately came to snuggle with me on the couch and watch it. And while my two younger children now, who are 3 and 1, played on the floor and occasionally watched. So when it got a little too tense, they distracted themselves with other things. But a couple more years, we'll scaffold.
See, it's not just me.
No, not just you at all. Not just you at all.
Thank you very much, Eric. And now to introduce tonight's special guest panelist, we begin with ISU alum Mr. Tatsu Shigeta. Tatsu, come on in, tell the audience a little something about who you are, as well as your favorite My Neighbor Totoro memory.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Tatsu Shigeta. I am a tech company account manager by trade. Also a all but defended doctoral student at Northeastern University for my PhD.
Awesome.
I'm also the brother to fellow panelist Rio, who will likely come on here claiming that he's the older, wiser brother, but who's got the higher degree, right?
Ooh.
Shots fired. Shots
Spoken
fired.
like a true younger sibling. Good job.
Oh yeah. For my favorite memory, I'll use a little prop.
Aww.
Say something. Show that again, would you?
Can you hear it?
Yeah, it's a music box.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Is it playing the theme song?
It is. I gifted that to my partner a couple of years ago, but I think what that kind of says is that song in Totoro in general has been ever present in my life. It always evokes a certain sentiment, a certain memory. I always associated with my childhood and growing up in Japan as a younger kid. And yeah, whenever I am introducing people to anime, I probably don't throw them at Mononoke necessarily, like Dr. Teresa, but Totoro is definitely a go-to because who doesn't love it, right? So
Fantastic. So glad you could join us this evening. And now another one of tonight's special guests. It's the man with a voice built for radio, Mr. Rio Shigeta. Rio, please come on in and tell us something about who you are, as well as your favorite My Neighbor Totoro memory.
Well, hello. My name is Rio Shigeta. I am a BFA actor, dungeon master, and as Tatsu said, older brother that is more concerned with substance than titles.
Oh!
Yeah.
I love it.
Spoken like a true big brother. Good job.
There you go.
What I will say about Totoro and my my best Totoro memory, I can never think of like a superlative best anything. That's just not how my brain works. But I will say that in 1986, when I was being born in November, somewhere else, Miyazaki Hayao was pitching Totoro for the first time and failing.
Wow.
And we can talk a little bit more about that later if we like.
Absolutely.
No, it's fantastic. So glad you could join us again this year. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my extreme pleasure to welcome tonight's ReggieCon panel special guest, the one, the only, the award-winning longtime writer of the X-Men, Mr. Chris Claremont. Chris, please come on in and tell the audience a little something about yourself, as well as your favorite My Neighbor Totoro memory.
Well, I'm academically inferior to everybody else here,
Oh, please.
although my kids are catching up.
Mm.
My favorite Totoro memory, I guess, is watching a bootleg VHS copy back in the dawn of time
Yep.
and realizing that this is a wonderful film and thinking, I really want to find that bus stop.
Okay, so that's my next novel. I really want to find that bus.
That's right.
stop.
That's right.
It exists in Japan. I mean,
Yeah,
the recreation of it.
Well, I could always pretend to be a Ukrainian and go look for it, but there you are.
There you go. That's right.
So, before we go any further, I just want to let you know I invited Mr. Chris Claremont to join a panel talking about someone else's work because, in addition to being Chris Claremont, he's also a huge Miyazaki fan, and I have the evidence.
That's right.
So while we have Sean in the house, I want you guys
Can you
to
guys
get
hear that?
ready for the big reveal.
Yep.
Okay. For the flyer for next month's, this is just off the hook.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that's very cool. Miyazaki is just absolutely brilliant in imagination, in execution, in just about everything. I mean,
So with that kind of enthusiasm, how can we not have him on to talk about Miyazaki? Before we go a little further, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge, the times we're all kind of living in, because we're about to talk about something that we love, and it's caught up in this crazy things going on in this world. Hopefully we're making our way out of this 2-year pandemic, the invasion of Ukraine, school boards attacking critical race theory, voting rights legislation, Roe v. Wade, just to name a few. Hopefully we can all take a bit of inspiration from this magnificent story we're going to discuss tonight. With a little imagination, a whole lot of love, and a deep appreciation of equity, diversity, and inclusion, we can make our way through all of this to the better versions of ourselves. Together. Yes, we can. So now what I'm going to do is share with y'all my favorite memory of My Neighbor Totoro. And for you men who watch this in terms of with your daughter's eyes, these are my daughters years after we watched Totoro raising acorns in my backyard.
Adorable. I love it.
That is exactly what they're doing. We had just done those plants that they're praying over. We're not doing well at all. And so as an incompetent father, my daughters went out and invoked the magic of Miyazaki and helped those plants grow. So here's what we're going to do. I've asked each of you to come up with your favorite scene, line, character, whatever, and we're going to start with Chris and, your favorite bit, and then we'll just move on through the crew, and that's how the conversation will go on. So, Mr. Claremont, the floor is yours.
I need 2 of those.
I have a bigger one. You can't have it. The little one fits in my office. The bigger one's in the living room, which is now my son's office. It's very annoying.
There you go.
But the thing about Miyazaki and about Totoro is the casual presentation of wonder. I mean, it's 2 girls are waiting for a bus. It's raining, and they suddenly realize there's this 4 or 5 meter, very plump thing standing next to them. And they're trying to figure out the classic, should I be afraid or should I just sit here? Am I imagining this? But he's got an umbrella, they have umbrellas, and then the bus comes, only it's not the bus they were expecting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, from that point on, it is a marvelous, casual journey into a wonderland. And it's the balance of the world we know that is familiar to us and this very strange but structurally logical world that's right next door. It's again wonderful. You can't help but being pulled in, because for me anyway, especially as a periodical writer, comes next.
I agree with that.
Hallmark, brilliant story.
I absolutely love that scene you're talking about. To be honest, I was so taken with it. That's going to be my favorite part. And I go through the sequence of events that happens on that, because it just blows you away. You don't know what you're watching. You grab tightly, and it changes you with little work on your part, and stunningly well done.
As a longtime comic book fan, it is always amazing to hear legends of our field be inspired and captured by other practitioners of story. So hearing you say that, Chris, is tip top, because that's one of those things where, like, when it comes to telling stories in our medium, your name resonates as a kami, if you will, and here you are speaking in terms of Miyazaki's work and finding that same level of wonder. That's a huge level of respect, and I appreciate you giving him those flowers right here for all of us to hear. That was amazing.
It's totally easy because you can draw. Those of us who are, how shall we put it, crippled in that regard, it's just wow. But it's integrating in a way that takes me back to the 1930s Superman cartoons, where the visual eloquence, the richness of the storytelling, of the presentation is remarkable. And the thing with Miyazaki is that every film
I think
imagination, I guess. I mean, you've got Kiki's Delivery Service,
right?
Which you have the paradox of a totally modern world that still uses, giant airships. Princess Mononoke.
Yes.
I could go on. I mean, it's the thing I find most impressive about it, oddly enough, is that when the God Emperor decided to adapt them, they went out and got an A+ cast of voice actors, American voice actors, to do it. And that in and of itself is an acknowledgement that isn't applied to virtually any other film in the Japanese anime canonical repertoire.
Love that.
Well, that's a nice phrase.
Yeah, write that one down. I like that.
If I can go back to the actual cat bus, I think anyone who has grown up taking the bus, as I did, I'm from San Francisco, and I have waited for many a bus. That cat bus is more than magical. It's more than wonderful, right? I wish that there was a cat bus.
I'm sorry. To go through San Francisco on a cat bus? Oh,
come on, that would be amazing. Those hills
on the power lines.
That would be the best thing ever.
You don't need the golden over the bridge.
Yeah,
over the
bridge. Who needs a cable car when you have a cat bus? That's what I'm saying.
And if this movie had been available in the
Miranda
60s.
walking Can you imagine getting in a cat bus, leaping over the Golden Gate, and just showing up at George Lucas's house and saying, "Hey, dude."
Hey.
Yeah. I think Jerry Garcia would have wrote a tune about it if it had
absolutely.
happened.
Absolutely. How do you know he didn't? That's the question
that's
right
one
there.
of those songs, exactly. So let's move on to, let's just pick the older brother this time, and we'll go with Rio. So Rio, your favorite bit from Totoro.
Well, I feel so unoriginal, and I usually prepare multiple, but I was absolutely going to say the cat bus as well. But I'll go with it. I'll run with it like the cat bus with all 12 legs. It has the coolest theme song, is what I like about it. And it's just the weirdest creature, you know? Like, it's got those little rats with the eyes that blink for the blinkers and the backlights, and that thing that's probably its brain exposed that shows where it's going. Like, it's so twisted. And I learned a little bit more about it because I was interested. And apparently this creature doesn't have to be a bus. It before it was a bus, it took the form of a palanquin, which is, you know, those boxes that people carried around with like nobility in them.
Yeah.
And Miyazaki's justification for why it's a bus now is because the creature just saw a bus and it thought it was cool because Japanese kami think new things are cool. So I thought that was so fun.
That's amazing. And
also, they play on this at the exclusive short film that they air at the Miyazaki Museum or the Ghibli Museum in Japan. It's called May and the Kitten Bus. And May is able to trap a kitten bus, basically, in a room, and it becomes its own sort of vehicle. It starts as like a mini single rider vehicle that May can ride, and then it becomes a train, and then it becomes like a luxury ocean liner. So these things can change into whatever they want. This one just happens to choose a bus, and I think it's so fun.
That's awesome.
What I love about the cat bus, it's also the common with the Totoro, is that they're not made to look necessarily approachable, right? They sort of generate some uncertainty, approach a void. And I just think that was a beautiful vehicle for the whole theme in the show, right? Because there's all this joy and there's this dread in the background, the whole show that we don't really understand until later. And I thought those creatures really held that tension really well throughout the whole show.
And they call them obake, which are like, you know, trickster spirits or sometimes monsters or ghosts. Like, and that was Miyazaki's intent. These are sort of like tricky little spirits that are playing around in society. Part of the reason why it almost didn't get an audience or get picked up as a theatrical release, because
too
it was
scary.
To take the mic for just a moment, do we know how it's tied to Grave of the Fireflies? Okay. I'm going to nerd out for just a minute because that's why you have me here.
That's right.
So in 1988, when Totoro was released, it wasn't released as just Totoro, the film. It was released as a double feature with Grave of the Fireflies. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's one of probably the most devastatingly sad animated films of all time.
Ever.
And here's what happened. So Miyazaki had pitched Totoro in 1986 to Tokuma Shoten, a publisher that would invest and produce films, and they were like, it's kind of boring. It's set in like in 1953, and it's about like kids and spirits, whatever. So what happened was there was discussion with another director that was producing Grave of the Fireflies, and they said, how about we make it a double feature, 60 minutes, two films. And then they took it back to Tokuma Shoten, and they were like, so you want a double feature about spirits and graves? But then the publisher that was publishing the original novel of Grave of the Fireflies came in and said, we will fund the Firefly half if Tokuma Shoten will fund the rest, and they agreed to a double feature, and that's how it was able to be produced in theaters. If it weren't for Grave of Fireflies, Totoro might not have happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which one was shown first? Do you know?
That's a great question. I don't.
Because, man,
like,
I mean,
yeah, right?
I would hope
that.
Grave would be shown first, because
yeah,
just bring it back up a little bit.
Well, you might know that it didn't actually do very well in theaters. While it won tons of awards, like 21 plus, as far as I could count, in theaters it didn't do all that well, and I think that's partly to do with it. Is like the combo.
Oh, Lord.
Does anyone else see a correlation between Cat Bus and the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland?
Oh, for sure.
Yes.
Okay. I had to make sure it wasn't just me.
There's the scene initially that kind of makes the allusion to Down the Rabbit's Hole when May is out playing by herself and she picks up the broken bucket. And she's a stupid bucket, which is a beautiful, what a stupid bucket. And then you see her looking through and it's framed by the bottom of the bucket. And then that's when all the quote unquote magic really starts to happen. So I think it was definitely leaning into that and brilliantly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
How about you, Tatsu? Oh, go ahead, Eric. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just thought it was funny that you brought up the Cheshire Cat, because I didn't go there, but was anybody else creeped out by both Cat Bus and Totoro's grin?
Yes.
Or maybe it's just that I watch too many horror films, because
yeah, those were approach avoid grins for sure.
Yeah. No, when May first meets Totoro, my oldest daughter was like, is he gonna eat her? And like, we're not sure. Like, obviously we're supposed to have seen, so many different imagery pieces of Totoro looking so friendly, and it's my neighbor, yay! But that moment, she's like, he's gonna eat her, isn't he? Like, maybe she'll get out, but he's gonna at least try to lick her and find out if she tastes good. Like something, he's gonna attempt it.
It's almost as if, because I know when he wrote Mononoke, there was a bit of a reaction to all the violence he was seeing in anime. And so it wouldn't surprise me if he was putting us at the edge of our own expectations about these things with those kind of scenes, because he was very aware of what was going on in other work. Yeah. Okay, Tatsu, your turn. Favorite bit?
Yeah. I have to kind of go along with what Chris was talking about in terms of how casual it is, right? Miyazaki kind of takes the mundane and makes it interesting, right? It makes a snail climbing up a tree. It makes a frog just kind of hanging out fun, right? And kind of along with that, what's so great about Miyazaki films is like the attention to detail in the scene and going along with the mundane. What I love about it is it features a part of Japanese culture in an era of Japanese culture that a lot of Westerners aren't familiar with. So the era is set in the era called Showa. So in Japan, eras are designated by the emperor that rules over that era, right? So Rio was born in the very tail end of Showa, right? And that went up actually until the year that I was born, right? Which was called Heisei until very recently, which some of you may have seen in the news. It's very unusual for an emperor to give up their seat before they passed on. But anyways, it's cool because Showa is a cool time because it's a transition from traditional Japanese culture to a more mixed taking in Western style and other sorts of culture. So you see that, right? It's kind of probably more towards the beginning where you see that the older folks are certainly dressed in more traditional garb, but younger kids are wearing Western clothes. So you get to see those. You get to see the rice paddy fields and how they're farming things. You get to see like the actual tools that they're using, which is very of the time. And those are things that you don't really get to see, right? Like if if you were going to have an anime, right, especially around that time, you're thinking of like Akira, like a lot of stuff happening. You got cool motorbikes, like, you know, things going on. You don't see like, okay, they're planting some rice fields and there's some kids running around, right? But that's what I love about it, is they take this kind of mundane setting and make it magical, or, you know, magic, as Victor might be talking about in a little bit. But that's what I love about it.
Hearing you say that, it makes me experience Spirited Away as a sort of bookend compliment to Totoro, right? In other words, this was what he respected about that time, and Spirited Away very much seems to be a struggle to get people to remember certain types of things that he may have felt they were losing.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
And they're connected by soot sprites, those two movies. They're all connected.
Yep.
Right.
They totally are.
Yeah, because I was going to say, it seems like there's the My Neighbor Totoro features the future that we were looking for in Princess Mononoke, that balance of the modern and the natural, and everyone just kind of fitting together without being in battle. Everyone's already, they've reached that stasis period, and it's perfect. So if you look at that and see it as like, hey, this is where this could go, I think that's a great showcase of that.
And
so
even during, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to mention that it's interesting that you bring up battle also, because there is an original concept of the Totoro story where Totoro was actually a tribe of Totoros, and they went to battle with the humans.
Oh, wow.
And basically the Totoro tribe lost, and the story was going to be that one of the Totoro just kind of pops up in modern day, or whenever the film is set, and that was kind of the story. Instead, they sort of scrapped that, but that was allegedly recycled to become Pompoko, which is another Ghibli story. And by the way, speaking of Princess Mononoke and the Jomon era, Totoro supposedly is 1,000 and some years old, and there are in art books instances of Totoro learning from Jomon era, which is like the clay pottery and almost Bronze Age of Japan, learning how to use these clay pots, and then Edo era Totoro learning from kids how to use a top, which, as we know now, he got and now uses, sort of like the
Yeah.
umbrella that he gets from is it Satsuki? Yeah. Which he has no intention of returning, and he believes is an instrument that makes fun sounds when it rains, which I think is fantastic. But yeah, this sort of idea that Totoro is timeless. He's the ancient, in fact, he's the grandfather apparently, and the little medium blue Totoro is the father, and the little white Totoro is the child.
That's amazing.
There are generations of Totoro.
Fantastic. I think we'll move on to the ReggieCon crew here. Victor, favorite bit?
All right, so my favorite bit is more of a conceptual one, and it was the realization while watching this that what we've seen here is almost a cultural adaptation of something that has played in the States and has been really popular in the States, and it's Sesame Street. Sesame Street has this way of mixing this sense of magic and wonder, things that you can't explain why they are this, they just are, and it's integrated, woven into the everyday life of the people that experience it. Some people can see it, some people can't, much in the same way that, you know, originally Big Bird was the only one who could see Snuffleupagus, and he would tell people like, there's this, you know, big mammoth thing, and everybody's like, yeah, sure thing, Big Bird. Not even like recognizing the fact that you're talking to this 7-foot tall bird, and he's telling you that he sees this thing. You're like, meh, whatever. Like there's something that's real magic about that by integrating those things. And that's what it felt like while watching this was, you know, there was an answer for what something was without necessarily even going into the detail of how it did that, which is where for me, the difference between magic and magical is magic just is, right? Like that's this thing that you can't explain. It just is. Magical is a little more whimsy, a little bit more imagined, and it's a way to describe something as opposed to just this sense of saying like, look, I can't define this, but it's right here in front of me. And if it's not science, then it's definitely magic because it does exist, and I just don't have the acumen to give it anything more than that. Boom, it's magic. And so seeing how Totoro, the dust sprites, and that was the thing I loved about that. The dust sprites have multiple names. They call them dust sprites, and they call them dust gremlins or soot gremlins. Yeah. And I'm like, look at that. There's different names for the same object. They have just a total understanding of what they do. Hey, they live in, dark, empty places. If they like you, they'll leave. Done. Like they don't explain anything else. They don't explain where they came from. It's just a simple understanding of this is that level of magic, and it exists in this world that we live in, and we love it. So yeah, that was my thing right there.
I think there's also a connection there to the audience, right? Because the gremlins versus sprites is very different perception. And I was all about, no, they're gremlins. You can call them sprites, you can call them magical fairies, but those are some damn gremlins, and I'm out of there. And I love how the children and the dad too, but the children in particular are just like, okay, let's go find out, let's go see, let's go uncover, let's talk to them, have a conversation. And I'm just like, get out of that.
So I was watching. I watched this in Japanese leading up to this, and I don't know if this translated over, but the dad, when he's describing, because the girls are describing to him what they've seen, and he's like, oh, that happens when like you close your eyes and you see the little like black shadows and things like that. It's probably just that when you like open up a lit room, like you'll see those things. And it reminded me of, and Scott will love this if anybody in the audience has seen a show called Mushishi. It's a lot like that, right? Like senses are integrated into the spirits and things like that in Japanese. In Japanese, you kind of talk about things as if they are of the physical world or the magic world, right? Like the spirit world. It's just kind of like you don't really think twice about talking about things like that in Japanese, and certainly there's religious undertones to that with Shintoism, but it's just kind of natural to describe things in a fantastical way.
For example, the word for thunder in Japanese is kaminari, which also explains lightning and thunder, but the word originates from God roar or God echo. And this is just a normally used word, just with religious or spiritual roots. And there are a lot of words like this, and things like kamaitachi, which explains like a miniature tornado, is like a creature that spins the air and cuts things. It's crazy, but in the way that Cat Bus is sort of explained as being the wind. The first appearance of Cat Bus even actually isn't visual. When Satsuki's gathering the firewood for the bath, there's a gust of wind and her sticks all fly away. That's the first appearance of Cat Bus, even though she can't see it at the time.
Very, very cool. So let me ask you guys just a quick question about that, because I'm wondering how much when Japanese content is brought into translated for an American audience, our language is so inherently dualist in its relationship between what we want to call reality and the spirit world or whatever. Is it really are translators forced to explain things to Westerners in a dualist framework that doesn't exist in Japanese culture? So, because it seems like I asked the question. I just wonder what you guys think.
The short answer is yes. Being a translator, absolutely. I wish that I could add, annotations and paragraphs to everything that I translate line by line, because I have to make decisions all the time as to what fits the connotation and the tone as well as the context in another language that has a limited vocabulary for that specific thing, you know, and different languages are much more explanatory about things like, you know, snow or the forest. There are all kinds of words that describe the light in a forest in Japanese that just aren't extant in English. And you know, the word kami that we talk about, or nushi, if you want to bring up more mushishi style concepts of like the master of the forest, or the lord of the forest, or the grand master spirit of the forest. And I can't say all of those in one line to explain what nushi means, you know? So yes, absolutely, it is not possible.
Everything has an asterisk on it, you know what I mean? Like you can translate it directly, but it's always gonna have an asterisk because it's just not gonna directly translate it.
You know what's interesting, and what a crazy correlation. Chris somewhat does that with a lot of the instances in X-Men where there's a simplified action that is occurring in a panel, but Chris will break it down in a way where, okay, so take Storm, and she's gonna lightning strike a Sentinel. You could just see that, boom, Storm lightning strikes a Sentinel. But he'll write in a way that it was Aurora Monroe, mistress of the elements, wields her mutant ability, and it becomes that asterisk where you take just this imagery and you go, okay, that's the simple, okay, boom, that's just a word. But I'm gonna give you this is an absolute compliment, because you are building that dualistic extended language of what we're actually seeing. You're writing poetry to what is just a quick visualization, and that's what that sounded like to me.
Okay. But the thing with Miyazaki is that, especially with Totoro, is the differentiation between two kids and the rest of the world.
Mm.
In that even her their mother's in peril.
Right.
Their father is commuting back and forth, spending as much time with his wife as he can, because there's the anxiety that this may be it, but they don't know.
Mm.
And the kids are on their own. But the differentiation is always that father's saying, well, yes, if you cover your eyes and then take your hands away, there will be these little fleckery spots. Don't worry about it. They're not living creatures. They're just lights. Whereas you find forgive me if I'm getting it confused, there's the grandmother who's like, there's something out there. Don't worry about it. And the kids are discovering it. Well, no, there's a differentiation. The very young, the very old, and the rest of the boring people in the middle, who've forgotten, or who don't see, or are too wrapped up in more what is to them far more crucial and more important things, like the shattering of a family for reasons they don't understand, or the risk of it. The kids have the advantage of going out to get the bus and suddenly finding, whoa, what the heck is that? And by the same token, is Dad Totoro saying, oh, what the heck is that? It's there's a very fine line between, but distinct line between those who can see what is beyond.
I'm mad because that froze, but that was such a poignant
I was gonna
spot.
say there's a mic drop right there, man.
Yeah, right? Those that can see beyond. Like we don't even have to know what else he said. That was perfect.
That's it's actually a common theme across Miyazaki movies too. If anybody's seen like The Borrowers or Arrietty, same thing. Like kids can see the little people. The old folks know about it because they saw them when they're kids, and the people in the middle just don't really care because they're just caught up in life. Right? So yeah, I love that.
Wow.
They're all connected.
Hey, let's move on to Teresa's favorite bit.
Yes. So my favorite bit is when May meets Totoro. That in the forest, and she crawls up on him, and it's the moment that Victor mentioned, that where his daughter was like, she's gonna get eaten, isn't she? Because I felt the same way. There's that so many things going on in that one scene. That mix of tension is like, okay, you have very whimsical music, and I absolutely love the sound of the music, and I'm gonna talk about that later. But and there's that whimsical moment, and she's asking him his name, and he's sort of roaring his name, and she's like, and then she roars back, and I thought that was so lovely. And you see her teeth, and you see that the ferocity of childhood, right? But also the fearlessness of childhood, and she's at that perfect age. I think, what is she, 4, right? So I have a niece who's 4. She's 4 going on 5, and she has all of that same sort of curiosity. If she saw a Totoro, at the bottom of the steps, she'd be like, I'll be back later, and just take off. But I love the tension of, is like, what kind of movie is this? I'm still in that place at that moment of, is she just going to get eaten up? Is it going to be like, like the whale eating her up, and maybe she'll get out, somehow? Is this going to turn into a horror movie? Is it no? But it's so cute at the same time, because she's adorable. And there's this part where I'm really unsure, and I hate to bring this lens to it, but I'm going to do it because that's what I do. But there's her like little undies, and her dress is super short, and it's very deliberate, that waving of her little dress, and you see her little white undies, and I'm like, is this going to take like a weird turn? Because there's a certain level of sexualizing of that child with that, in that outfit, but not really. But yeah, a little bit, but not, I'm like, I don't want to be that person, but let's take a look at it. So but I love that, because there's so many things happening in that same moment, and it's a lovely moment, right? There's that bonding, that connecting between these two beings that happens, and again, that fearlessness of childhood, which I think is the sort of emotion that comes through the most, the strongest, of that May has no fear, and when she expresses what she thinks Totoro's name is, the creature's kind of like, yeah, okay. There's no acknowledgement.
Whatever you said.
There's just the facial expression. So the emoting is minimal, absolutely minimal, but there's acceptance there, and I feel like they sort of accept each other in each other's lives in that moment. So
definitely, when you went back to sleep,
my favorite moment.
Like, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Victor, you looked like you were going to say something.
Oh, I totally was, because there was a moment for me, not that specific moment, where, as I was telling Scott earlier, I had to check my American ideals at the door a little bit. And it was when we saw the girls in the bath with their dad. And that was one where I was like, oh. And it was, obviously it wasn't the fact that the girls were taking a bath together. It was that he was taking a bath with them. And what surprised me was just the simple communal nature of it, right? Like there wasn't anything that was made a big deal about it. It was just like, this is how we have to take a bath. And I had to check myself, because literally, as a father of girls, my youngest daughter is roughly the same age at 4. My oldest daughter is 12. I wouldn't, bathe around my 12-year-old daughter. I just would not. And just as I wouldn't expect her to bathe around me. And I had to check it and think, maybe there is a cultural thing that is a little different, considering that this is taking place post World War II. They had to, use a water pump to get this water. Maybe that's a necessity. Like, I'm sure there's a point in time in American history where, to take a hot bath was, a family dynamic. You got one shot at a hot bath, and if you're the oldest, you got the hot water, and as many people hopped in that tub as possible, because if you waited till the end, you were taking an ice bath. And that was such a moment that I had to, outside myself from this movie and go, remember, this isn't your culture. This is not what you would do. This is what they do. Maybe there's something I don't understand about it. So to that point, Teresa, like there were moments where I was like, oh, wait.
Yeah. And also keeping in mind for me that, well, first I want to say before I forget it, not just not a hot bath, but a dirty bath. That's what you get when you're last, right?
That's also true. That's also true.
But there is a certain fetishization of cuteness, right? In popular culture, in Japanese popular culture,
Right.
And this is very much a thing. And I've noticed that, and in other places too. But I was mesmerized though by her little dress. I was just hypnotized by, because it's a long scene with they could have just kept it flat, but it waves in the wind, and I'm just sort of drawn in by it. And I thought, wow,
Is
this
that
is
cat
a
bust
really
though?
interesting moment. Yeah.
Well, following up on both of you in both of those scenes, I'll take the hit for my reaction. I saw this and I said, finally something written by adults, right? This is family life, and it's none of our business. No one's being traumatized in that scene. As a matter of fact, the father is managing everybody's fear in that scene.
Right.
And he's managing their fear in his culture's way. And I just thought, okay, I can actually show this to my kids and they'll understand a little bit more about the kind of culture I would prefer, I would want to live in.
Right.
So those are my honor. I said, damn, this is grown up. This is grown up stuff. And it's one of those things that said, well, it's one of those things where again, Miyazaki is special, simply special and bold. And I loved it.
I think that plays on that duality of that concept between something being magic and magical. This was grown up, but not intended to be adult, which I think is that's a super fine line in our, consideration today, but not necessarily anywhere else. And I can't wait to hear, Rio or anybody jump in and say, culturally, what was that?
Cue. Cue, Mike.
There it is.
There we go.
There it is. Yes, and absolutely. I was just waiting to validate your comments in that absolutely it is cultural. Let's talk about Japanese people, and nudity. They have a very, very different relationship than we do in the United States with nudity, especially with children, and just communal nudity as well. It's if you watch enough anime or Japanese television shows, you'll see that it's not abnormal for friends, family, even acquaintances generally to bathe together. It's a communing experience, and it's an interesting point that you brought up about limited hot bath water. That's probably a thing. It is also an honor usually given to the father of the household traditionally to take the first bath, but it's absolutely not abnormal for families to bathe and shower together. I mean, like uncles, parents, and the kids, totally a normal thing. And like I said, you go with your friends to an onsen vacation, to the hot springs, and you will be completely nude and bathe together. It's not a weird thing. But to your point, Teresa, and just sort of in the context of the film, I do notice both of the times that the instances that we're talking about are points in which the girls especially are vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And I do think that does exist, that while you are nude, it is still revealing yourself in a way. And I think that in this context especially visually tells us that the girls are in a vulnerable state, because if you remember in the bath there's this storm and the whole house is rattling and the girls are genuinely scared, and we get to see the dad be like, here's how you take care of it, roar. and May is in a vulnerable state with this giant creature. Who knows what's going to happen, and maybe it is a little bit of like we're seeing a little bit more under her skirt, because we're seeing a little bit more under her veneer, although at her age it's not so much a veneer. I think it's just a dial or a chipping away of her courage to actually assess the situation. So, in summation, nudity not weird. In Japan, it is a cultural thing. There is a differentiation between perverse nudity and communal nudity, I guess.
And like last point that I'll say there is you'll notice if you go back and watch it, there are two bathtubs that are right next to each other. That means that it's pretty common for both of them to be used at once, right? Time. So yeah, just to touch on that.
Well, on that note, we'll go to Eric. Eric, your favorite bit about Totoro?
Well, in many ways, what I had written out for myself here, that's what I do to keep myself in check, has kind of been touched on by just about everybody's responses in some way. So I'll pick a different moment that is a variation on this theme. I just love how natural the characters are about the prospect of ghosts and living in a haunted house, right? Like the moment when the girls are coming up, they're like, hey, maybe it's haunted, cool. And then the dad's like, oh, I always wanted to live in a haunted house. And the mom says that too. And I've been watching anime since early 90s, a lot of bootleg VHS tapes, things like that. And I, even knew at a young age, there were things that I was missing culturally, right? There were references, values, beliefs, and things that just weren't part of my experience. So as I've grown older and been able to take my nerdy passions and my academic passions and merge them together, I've started doing some research and interested in the way that supernatural elements are depicted, and the psychological implications, the cross-cultural implications of that. And as we sort of talked about earlier, this idea of the mundane world and the spiritual world, right, sort of coexisting. I've seen a lot of anime scholars write about how they pick this film as sort of the archetypical depiction of Shinto beliefs in anime because of this sort of thing, right? And if the narrative had occurred in the U.S., right, instead of the girl saying, hey, cool, this is a haunted house, let's go explore, it would have gone 0 to Poltergeist in like the drop of a hat. Boom, demon clowns, right? So it's kind of what we've been talking about, right? This mixture of a nice, touching, playful mix of wistfulness and mundanity that is just awesome.
I love that.
And I'll open the floor.
I love that.
This brings me back to Victor's discussion earlier about magic and magical. And magical, mundane, and magical is kind of how I'm making the connection there, because in Latino culture, we very much live in a magical realist world where the supernatural, the magical, they sort of all come together, and it's just how you grow up, especially as it relates to death, as it relates to ghosts. And we never use the word haunting or haunted. Things are not haunted. It's just spirits. And it's just, we wouldn't use the word sprites either, or gremlins for that matter, but it's very spiritual and magical. It just sort of is. Like when people pass, like, oh, there's probably going to be a knock on the door, or before cell phones, the phone will ring and it'll be your grandfather, so you'll pick it up and no one will answer. This is like, okay. I think of it now, I'm like, that's crazy. Right. But it is very mundane in that it's perfectly accepted that, like, sure, you'd go out and, go out in the, maybe not in the woods. I'm trying to think of a parallel experience where, well, I guess depending on where you live, having grown up in the city, it would be like an experience on a bus, maybe not a cat bus per se, but like, oh, I saw this dude on the bus, and it turns out, and I turned around and he was gone, or, the driver hasn't been a driver for the 14 mission in San Francisco for 10 years because he passed away. And it's just like, sure, yeah, absolutely. But also these stories of people doing magical things, like Ana Castillo has a book called So Far From God, and there's a whole thing about just people doing these things that that as you read the book, you're like, well, that's crazy business. And as a, you know, as a Latina reading the book, I'm like, yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Yeah, I was like, that's cultural.
Like, how can that even be? So much of what happens in the film, to me, although I'm like, you know, I don't know if this is a, you know, a kid movie or if this is a horror movie or what, until I've seen the whole thing. And now I can't wait to show it to my niece and nephew, by the way. But so much of it is like, yeah, sure, okay. I mean, I still am not on board with the whole, you know, soot sprite, soot gremlins.
Were they a little too spidery for you? You could tell us.
Yeah, just too much. But I sort of get like, oh yeah, okay, I could see how that, you know, the cat bus comes every once in a while. So yeah, sure, okay.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, what is
That's
it that the girls say right after the whole night and the tree growing, and they wake up and the tree's not there, but they come out and the little sprouts have come up,
Mm-hmm.
and it's they say like it was a dream, but it wasn't a dream.
Exactly. That's it.
It's that
That's
like
it.
we could explain everything away here if we really wanted to say that, oh, it was all in the girls' imaginations, and then, you know, point by point pick out how, you know, it's just the magic of youth or whatever. But it is a dream and it isn't a dream. The magic of sprouts coming out of the earth after you've planted them, that is a dream and it isn't a dream. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that magic exists in our hearts. That happiness, that those synapses firing and all the fun juices coming out. That's magic.
I love
right?
it. I love it.
Yeah. It's like it's
That's
it's
a
almost,
scientific description right there.
yeah, exactly. It's almost like a manifestation of community, and that's such a good point, Teresa, because like, you know, you think about like Dia de los Muertos, right?
Yeah.
There's an exact parallel to that in Japan. It's called Obon, which is, you know, a holiday to you know, respect those that have passed. I bet you can find that all over the world. But it's such a good point, because that's not something that, you know, we necessarily think about in, you know, Western, at least like US culture. But yeah, it's just kind of, you know, going back to it, like it's just kind of a mundane thing. It's just kind of ever present because you're a community oriented culture. Of course, those that have passed on are still part of it, and you don't think twice about it.
Yeah.
It's very
what's
normal
going
to have
on-
a shrine to your family members within your house, and that's just their house, their little house within your house. You go there, you talk to them, you make sure they're fed, you light some nice scented candles or incense, and you're like, hey, grandma, grandpa, cool to see you. Here's what happened today. And that's just how it is.
Yeah.
They're there, you know.
We do that right now. We have an altar to my mom passed in 2017, and we never really practiced that until she passed, and we have an altar and her ashes are there, and we put things at different holidays, and it's a little bit of a joke now where it's like, okay, well, who put the pan dulce, who put the Snickers, who put the Coke, and who's gonna, you know, who's gonna
Who's actually gonna
clean
eat
it up after, you know? And we chat with her. But to go back to the film, there's an underlying story, right? The mom's in the hospital, and we don't know if she's going to die. There's the threat throughout the whole thing that she could pass at any moment. So I think there is that otherworldly connection happening throughout this film.
I wanted to throw in about the aspect of balancing mundane occurrences, and mundane meaning every day. Chris, with the X-Men run that you've done, one of my favorite things would be how you would have very casual everyday issues, right? Them playing baseball would be like a sense of mundane lifestyle in the midst of world-shattering, life-altering chaos on the basis of them being these hated mutants. But then you would have these moments where they were just people. And that was always the part for me that made your run of X-Men so prolific, was these weren't just superheroes or, you know, costume folks just fighting crime. They were people. And it seems like that's something that Miyazaki is building with this piece. And Eric, you were talking about that. And I was curious, were those issues for you to write, were those hard to get across to editorial, where they always wanted you to have something big happening? Or were they even able to see the importance of the rest period to make the next storm that much better?
Well, no, I mean, I have the advantage of starting pretentious as this sounds, before a lot of people here and elsewhere were even born. Because back in those days, the dawn of time, as they say, A, we had a lot more freedom, and B, if you had the right editor, and I was gifted to have some of the best in the early foundation days, nobody really gave a damn. They wanted a good story. They wanted things to work. And for me, the way to make them work was to make life real. It isn't all about running around in skin tights and punching people. It's about, for example, with the New Mutants, who's going to do the dishes?
Right.
Who's going to cook the food? Who's responsible for the mundane? And the thing about Totoro is you have this balance, as we said before, between the reality that is surprisingly mundane and yet this underlying sense of wonder. And it's as basic and as primal as the younger sister going out and seeing the world as it is, and then suddenly discovering these little bits that are really cool, a little scary, but they're really cool. And the thing I've always loved about Miyazaki is clouds. I mean, and this is going back to Lupin, which, he just came, he did as a rental. I got to earn some money this week. I'll do a Lupin. But all the elements are there. You look, why would in an anime, when you've only got 83 minutes and you have to draw it all, why do you spend 10 seconds here and 5 seconds there and 10 seconds in the other, an hour down the line, showing clouds drifting by? What does that do? What it does is it creates an embracing sense of reality. Because we look up, we see clouds going by. Wow, they're really cool. Just like you watch little flowers sprout out of the ground, and the next thing you know, they're trees. The thing about Totoro is it's the most, for me anyway, the most embracingly, understatedly magical of his films. And it gets under the radar and under the audience defenses, I think, to say, yeah, you may think you're grown up, but deep down inside, this is what you used to be, and this is what you're missing now.
Wow.
Isn't it cool? And you think, wow, this is cool. And then you get to the closing credits and you get the happy ending because mom's back. They're all together and they've all discovered Totoro. So it's like, it gives you a throwaway happy ending so you can leave the theater thinking, no worries. But getting there, you're marking all these little steps along the way that, weirdly, within the context of the 80s, back in that ancient era.
Hey, now.
Right.
Imagine that. No, but think of you're watching this film on bootleg VHS tapes. Well, think of what was happening in the world in the 80s, especially at that time. It was kind of creepy.
Yeah.
On a whole host of reasons. Nuclear holocaust not being the worst, but being up there.
Right.
And it's a way of saying, or at least to me at that time, it was a way of saying, don't forget about the cool stuff that's actually down on the level. And if you think about it, you might be able to cope with the big stuff. And I guess this is, for me, it's a realization that Miyazaki and I, forgive the utter pretentiousness of this, we're kind of walking down the same road.
That is not pretentious. It is truth.
That you can
Speak
say
that
that
truth,
you're
sir.
on your side of the screen. I'm here thinking, what a bobblehead. But it's trying to find a way to express what's happening around you in terms that your audience will instantly accept, so that you can then slip all the important stuff down around the sides. You know, I mean, when you think about what sort of idiot spends their whole life running around in skin tight, quote unquote, spandex, getting punched every other page. I mean, give me, I'm sorry. Every time I see Bruce Wayne take off his suit and you realize how punched out his back looks, you know, at least Christian Bale went to a spa weekend down wherever that he got thrown in the third film and got his act together and ran off with the girl at the end. But it's like, there has to be a moment where you sit back and say, give me a break. But with Miyazaki, you're getting the breaks.
Right.
And you're sitting there and thinking, oh my God, mom is in the city fighting for her life, presumably. She's got to get better because look at the world her kids are discovering.
Yeah.
And then the other half of the flip side, for me anyway, is, oh my gosh, in 5 years when they're in the end of middle school and moving on to think about high school, the equivalent, and university, will they get so wrapped up in their real world that they'll forget about all this? Well, what
they'll do is they'll have a dad that'll ask them to go out and grow plants for them by raising them from the ground. I mean, this is the impact of Miyazaki stories. This is part of our lived life with my kids. And I showed you the picture, right? The authenticity of that relationship between the two girls is priceless. So here's what we're going to do. We got about 15 minutes. So I want to encourage anybody in the audience, if you have questions, I've been watching, haven't seen any, but feel free to post questions. What I want to do is do my favorite bit, and then we'll see where that gets us with questions. And I'm just going to say my favorite character in the movie is the dad. The reason is because the honest way in which they portrayed an absent-minded professor. And I just love the scene where she's off to school. He's alone with May. And May says, Dad, I'm going to go. And he says, okay, come back for lunch. And then he's writing his stuff and you just see his brow get furrowed and he's doing his work. And then you see her in the background just running around. And next thing you know, she's gone. And no, actually, she comes up and he sees that she's putting little flowers on his desk. And she goes, Dad, you can be the flower shop. And he goes, okay, that's awesome. He picks it up. He looks at it. And then he just looks back down at his paper and he's swirling the... What I love about that is the honesty, the lack of judgment, allowing this guy who is living in the boring middle, nonetheless being authentically portrayed. And there's a scene... We've all talked about the Kappa scene, and there's something pivotal there because there's a montage that happens that I just want to go through, quickly, clip by clip, what we were being exposed to. So the girls are at the bus stop in the dark with the umbrella. Dad's not on the bus. When Dad's not on the bus, we see this montage that thrusts us through a variety of psychological tensions that the girls are experiencing. So first we see a distant shot of a building and we're in the forest with the rain and we're struggling to figure out if that's where the bus stop is. Then you see a shot looking up at the sky in the forest and the rain coming down to the camera, if you like. Then we see May's feet in a puddle. Then the scene pans out and we see her playing in the puddle and Sasuke with the umbrella doing a yarn game with her hand. Then we see May wander off and look at a shrine. And then we see all these different images of the shrine. And what does she do? She runs over and she buries her face in May's skirt and hugs her, right? And that happens 3 different times, not with May, but with me and Sasuke, where somebody gets run to and hugged 3 different times as if this is too much. I can't make sense of all of this and I'm coming to you. So then the light comes on, Kappa shows up. he gets on the bus, he takes off, and Satsuki says, "Well, so much for bringing Dad's umbrella." And I just, the brilliance to put that little moment of just levity in that scene. And of course, Dad shows up later, and what happens? The first thing they do is they run and they grab him, and they don't say anything. They just grab him, and they sit there for like at least 3 or 4 seconds with them just holding him. And then he says, "Were you worried?" And then they look up after they have had a moment to process, to chill with Dad. Then they say, "We saw the Totoro." So yeah, they were scared as hell. They were worried as hell. But the dad with them kept finding a way to keep that balance between their world and whatever other world we want to talk about. Just there and real and present. And I just love the respect that that character was given. Because he could have been seen, like, he walks off the bus nonchalantly. What? Yeah, the bus was late. It's like, what do you mean the bus is late, dude?
Well, you know what's funny is the underlying piece of what that showed, though, was the actual sense of community that the village had, which was almost immediately, it was understood that these girls are now part of the village and therefore should be looked after like anybody else that had grown up there. You know, they immediately adopted Granny, or Granny adopted them, by way of, she started watching May immediately. Like, in our modern society, can you imagine just moving to a place and designating a person, hey, you're going to watch my kid? No way. Like, there's background checks upon background checks upon word of mouth, and then I'm still going to threaten you. Like, there's so many different ways that wouldn't exist for us. But there's almost this homogenization of people and just being, that they have this innate understanding that, to me, that was the reason why he could let May run, because they're now a part of this cultural village that will look after her. You know, it is the literal village that raises a child. And we see it in practice, because as soon as May goes missing, spoilers later on, the entire village literally comes together to try to find her. And I mean, great lengths to, I mean, huge. I don't want to spoil it if you haven't watched it, but huge efforts to show that they are one unified family.
I love it. And just if I could just quickly finish up on the scene, this idea of we're all together, and we've been talking about kami and our American interpretation of what that might mean. This whole series of images I just discussed is rounded out by a toad who walks across the screen for 3 seconds. We have to sit and watch for 3 seconds. And then something else happens 5 minutes later, when the frog is now sitting there looking at the camera. And then Dad shows up, they hug each other, they laugh, and the frog does a frog croak. You know, the frog is us, we are the frog, right? And your comment about them being part of a culture that's more holistic, that extends to the reality, the forest that they live in. They actually experience the forest communally. And that is, if I ever have to describe Shinto, I think Eric's right. There's a certain archetypal aspect of this show that shows living in this sort of communal, I don't want to say harmony, but this space with the world, with people, with culture, with the world, in this space where everything has meaning and everything's about everything and nothing's about itself. And I think that just plays out brilliantly. And yeah, I just want to get the frog out there because he's important.
Can I mention, related to this, I think, this sense of community and connection. So I saw the English version, the most modern English version of this. And so I don't know if this is true of the original, but I suspect that it is. I mentioned earlier this thing about sound. For me, the sounds of this film bring it together and bring even more of that sense of community together, because there's so much connectivity in the sound, particularly in the sounds of laughter. The voices are done so beautifully well. And I can't remember who it was who mentioned that, you know, just the really stellar voice casting of the English version, but the laughter, the ambient sounds, the sound of wind, right? The sounds of May's voice. So she's my favorite character because of her the child laughter, of course, but that little voice of hers, the little kid voice, but it's all carried out. It's there. There's no, even though you have that tension throughout, there's no dissonance in the sound, and I thought that really tied things together really beautifully. And so, and that for me was very manipulative in the best possible ways, the kind of thing that you go to see a film, for that experience. So I just love that. The sound for me was incredibly powerful and connective.
So we do have a quick question. Chris, who were some of the artists or artists you really dug back in the 90s and today's time? That's the question.
Miyazaki.
Well said. All right, next question. I'm actually in the middle of recollecting my 80s, 90s, and early 2000 comics. What was your favorite or funniest arcs from each era?
Oh, for God's sakes.
Just pick an era and give us an arc. How about that?
Well, let's see. Let me just consult my reference. It's the list is ridiculous because it's not. It's like saying, well, I love Stan Lee's stuff. I love Jack Kirby's stuff. I love Joe Kubert's stuff. Except that for me, it all starts with God forbid, classic English comics, Eagle. Frank in Dan Dare and Heroes of Spartan, Frank Hampson and Frank Bellamy. It's reading comics, books, history, that's source. Sources is all of the arble gargle you shove into your back brain so that when you sit down and actually start a story, you have bits and pieces to grab from. But the source material you're using is what you see walking around town, what you hear, watching the way, in the morning, walking the dog in Prospect Park and just eyeing parents with babies. Because there's nothing more fascinating than watching an 18-month or 2-year-old just managing, okay, one foot, the other foot. Uh-oh, I'm in third gear. This is cool. I'm really moving. I stopped.
Yeah, and then
start again. But forgive me for being redundant. You take that moment, you take that experience, that, wow, I don't know what's happening, but I'm moving. This is cool. Whoop, I didn't fall. I caught myself. And apply it to something like Totoro. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's finding ways to stitch the fiction together with those threads of reality that the audience can look at and say, oh, I've been in that bathtub. I've had this conversation with the kids. Does that mean I've got a giant tree in my backyard?
Yes.
I have a giant tree. Well, it's very thin, but it's getting taller by the day, which is really creepy. But that's it. You look out and you just apply the unreal to the real, and suddenly all these things become very clear and very comprehensible. And like I said, it's a totally different experience than walking through a bookstore and finding, oh my God, Battlestar Galactica. Oh wait, that's the wrong country. I'm talking about Yamato. This is such a cool story. Captain Harlock. That's as far removed from Miyazaki as you can get. But the connection is the sense of wonder and the sense of character and the sense of story and the sense of excitement. And that's, the thing I love is that they took the care when they dubbed it to use people who actually could act. I mean, you don't often expect to find Patrick Stewart in the back, as a back character in an anime.
No.
It was totally cool. But the whole idea is to hook people in on the best of reasons, that you want to see what happens next. And Miyazaki laid the foundation brilliantly, and you don't need to speak Japanese, although it would help. You understand what's happening. And that's all it is. It's just a sense of wonder and a sense of achievement of that wonder. And you're left wondering what happens next. And I talk too much. My apologies.
No, that's why you're here.
Absolutely.
As always.
Did anyone else think that the baby that May is holding hands with at the end was a younger sibling of hers? That was a sign of how much better the mom got, that they had another kid?
Okay.
Was that just me?
No, I just love that they did that with stills, right? I just love that. You're looking through a photo album and just don't. Background music's playing. I thought, Brian. Now, what I also
really
love
hope
about
they
that,
played that second after.
Say it again.
I just really hope they played Totoro after Grave of Fireflies.
Right.
And not the other way
My
around.
God.
We talked about how we find this magical nature and still we're not left wandering off because we're not interested in the fantasy of it, but we're grounded in reality. With Miyazaki and Totoro, whereas with Grave of Fireflies, it's almost the opposite of they're desperately trying to create fantasy and happiness within this all too real life, and they have to grow up far too quickly.
Oh, devastating. So when we used to go, my double feature experience was the drive-in theater, and they would have shown Totoro first, and then they would have shown Grave of the Fireflies later. One quick announcement: could I ask Jay Pineapples to stick around at the end? Because you ask a question, I'm just going to ask you to just directly connect with Dr. Rojas, and then you guys can. They said sure, very cool. They're still here. Any final comments about Totoro?
You do have one in the Q&A, Scott, that might be a question for everybody if you want to check that.
Oh, is that the one about the future?
Mm-mm.
Well, if I can address really quickly one of the questions, just in general, I do want to mention that our Latinx cartoonists are highly influenced by anime. And as a matter of fact, I've had some conversations. Some of them have sort of been in and out of watching the ReggieCon panels on YouTube, and we had Paul Meyer. Let me get his name right. Paul and Carlos of Under the Cottonwood Tree, which I would absolutely love to see that book become a film. I think it would just be gorgeous. But I've gotten a lot of comments about, hi, how come you get to talk about, Miyazaki films? And I'm like, because I'm awesome. I'm part of the crew. So there's a very strong connection, cultural connections, I think, and a lot of overlap, and of course, incredible influence that I think you see in a lot of Latinx work.
Well, on that note, it's 8:30, and unfortunately, it's time to bring this fantastic ReggieCon panel to a close. The last one of the year. Thank you so much to our special guest, Mr. Tatsu Shigeta, Mr. Ryo Shigeta, and the one, the only Mr. Chris Claremont.
Oh.
Thanks to everyone out in the audience for attending. Thanks to everyone backstage for making us look like we might know what we're doing. See all of you next year for season 3 of ReggieCon. Have a good evening.